Hello everyone, I'm Mike Levin from MikeLevinSEO.com, and we're in the Gropey project, and we just stepped through all the rows of a spreadsheet and got back a list of lists, but not all at once in memory. First one list, then the next, so that nothing ever clobbers the web server's memory by trying to load the entire spreadsheet all at once. And it appears, since we're dealing with lists, I've got a little bit of refactoring to do. All this upper area here that deals with name-value pairs was using what I knew of GData at the time. And now that we're dealing with lists, it makes more sense to use lists as the native format and make a higher level of compatibility with CSV, comma-separated values, which more closely resemble lists of lists. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a little bit of cleanup work initially. First, we don't need this column limit we learned, and we probably don't need this extra variable name hanging around. Until I need to refer to this thing more than once, I'm going to just put WKS dot row underscore count here, get rid of the reference here, and now do a little bit more cleanup on this other stuff we no longer need. These way to do updates, as nice as it is to keep samples in the code, it's really easy to get it out of the GSpread documentation, and it makes it a lot easier to read. So we'll save that. That's by way of cleanup. Now I pause while I think through next step. My first issue is to deal with the fact that when we get down to stepping through all rows here, I am using iteration for item in all rows. Now the all rows object is essentially what the WKS worksheet object is here, which is not iterable. And I actually want the loading of the object, the accessibility of the object, to fall off the end of this if-else-if statement, and then the iteration, or as it's going to probably be stepping through items in a list using a counter, is going to start here. Now, it's always a position of weakness to use counters in Python because so many things are iterable, but we can't in this case, and it does look like we're going to need that global end counter value after all, so that we can step through it identically, whether the data came locally off of the database on the drive or came through Google Spreadsheets. So the first step is going to be using that search and replace that we did before. I always like to jump to the top, not really necessary, but now you do colon %s. Now it's every occurrence of WKS is actually going to be replaced with all rows. That's what I chose as that concept. I'm going to stick with it. GC for global and confirm. Yes, yes, yes. And it's just the three occurrences. And now when we run this, it should still run identical. And if it does, I'll pause as I think through next steps. Okay, next steps. Okay, so there's a large chunk of this program that is dedicated to analyzing whether row 1 in the spreadsheet is function names or not. And there's a way to edit out a whole bunch of stuff in Python all at once, which is this triple quote trick. It works with single or double quotes, and I'm going to do that now to get rid of this whole chunk of code that deals with that stuff, because my objective is to get into this lower loop now that does for item in all rows, which is going to have to change a little bit. And I'm going to have to get the all rows compatible based on the two scenarios. So it's no longer for item in all rows. It's going to be a little different, and we're going to have to get that global variable back for, well, not global, we're going to have to get a variable back for the last row and make it global. So let's, this is going to become a simple counter now because it gets down to where the break occurs, and at the moment the break occurs, the value of I is very important. So this really takes on the meaning last row. So let's get rid of that I. It's always a pain to search on it. Bad practice to use one character variable names. Because it's when it's done, it's going to have the value of last row. It's not while it's iterating, but when it actually finishes, I'm going to like to have last row sitting around. And we don't need to print it anymore. I'll keep, let's see, if it has a value, I do need something to happen in there because we're just sort of stepping through it real quick. It's a real shame to have to get a count this way. You know, you're scanning the spreadsheet, getting the last row. There's some time cost there that I'd like to avoid. But from what I've seen of the API so far, it is unavoidable. And now this comes out with a value last row when it hits this else, because it's always going to hit an empty column eventually, or an empty row, that is to say. But I want that to be global. So globs.lastRow. globs.lastRow, and I think it's only used in those two places, and when it comes out, we've got globs oh, we have to do tab E, globs, and we have to have last row, and that's not going to be all capital because it's not going to be a constant. But we can do last row equals 0 just to initialize it. That will always equate false, and it lets us know we're dealing with an integer value, and you can quit out of that now. And this should actually still work as intended. Before we do the return, we want to print globs.lastRow to see what that's going to be. But we also want this upper sequence, when you're using the local files, to have the same concept here. But before I do that, I'm just going to see if, whoops, we broke anything or not, and if we get a print out of the number of rows. Good, correct number of rows, I believe. It's probably a let's see, 3. Okay, it's reporting the last row itself because it got up to that number. We might need a -1 on that. And I pause. Okay, we actually have to give this the same data structure as we're using below, which is a list of lists. Now the shelf object, which we're using here, is a dictionary-based object. So we're still going to have to use keys and values. But we're going to switch these keys to numeric keys that correspond to the positions, and I think they're using like a 1, a 2. I don't know. I don't think it's a 0-based index in this case, but we can always fix it if not. And now these are not to be dictionary objects. They are to be list objects. So instead of the curly brackets, we switch to square brackets. And instead of name value pairs, we just want the values that are found in the cell. And it takes on an identity which is much more similar to CSV files, which is really an advantage. You're going to be able to think of this as dropping a CSV file, well, setting up a spreadsheet in, say, Excel, putting your question marks in, saving a CSV file, running it directly into this, because now I think I'm going to be able to support CSV files locally. And it will end up replacing the question marks with the output of the functions, which is, of course, the big reward here. And positional indexes become very important here. There's no way to know what belongs to what except for where their position is in the list. Another advantage is it becomes much more readable, doesn't it? Only the keys go away, the values remain. And I'd like to remind you at this point what the spreadsheet would look like that has these in there, but I guess it's very similar to what you're looking at. Row 1 has foo bar, lumberjack knights, row 2 has hello world, question mark, and row 3 has spam eggs, question mark. Now if I were to run this now, all it's going to do is test to make sure that my syntax is correct. It's not actually going through that first if block, but it is still worth making sure I didn't make any stupid typing mistakes converting dictionaries to lists, and I have not. I pause. Okay, now I can say after the closing and then reopening for read-only, I can say that globs.lastRow and equals len, because you can always get the length of an object by using the length, the len function around it, and that's simply what we just reopened, all rows. Now I would point out that printing globs.lastRow is outside the if else statement, so it's going to report that number in any case, whether it goes through the if or the elif block. And I could just switch it and test it right now, but whoops, I actually want to save it and get rid of the database file. So I just saved it, I drop out into the shell, and I do an ls, and I want to remove drows because it'll get created fresh using all the new indexes. I don't want extra values hanging around in that shelf object. So I exit out. Now I'm going to run it once without changing the DB source, just again to make sure I made no stupid syntax mistakes. It's a 3. The number that comes back might be different when we use the other path, but I'm going to jump to the top with GG, and then I'm going to search for GDocs, and I'm going to replace Word with, let's see, no, I did that wrong. I'm going to change GDocs with local. Now, maybe by the time I'm done this, I will be super proficient with Vim. And now it's going through the top block of the if elif statement, and it should blow up. Yes, it blows up. There's always something you miss. So int has no attribute encode on line 11 in main. It's part of the shelf. Oh, okay, this just might be integer versus string values as keys in a dictionary. So I'm going to just insert see if that makes the Or go away. And indeed it does. And it has the same number of rows. So no matter which path it goes through, we have a maximum number of rows to step through on the object, which is still available by the time it comes out of here. So import shelf, populate the shelf if it's not, and then open it for reading. When you come out, you've still got the all rows object. Now here, you've got all rows being created by opening the spreadsheet, and then you step through it just to populate a counter, and when you're done, you still have the all rows object. In fact, that is so important, still having the all rows object. I think that's the last thing I'll do is print all rows without any special thing about it. I'll get the pointy bracket notation, but it's still important just because I want to see it's there. Yeah, it's there as a shelf object given the first route, and I search on local and change, and we hit change word. Okay, CW, that's what I wanted before, and I turn that into G docs. And then we go through we execute the code again, and I should get the pointy bracket and the row count again underneath of it. And that sets me up perfectly now for the next step. I know this was a slightly confusing step, but thanks for sticking with me through it. Perhaps I'll do some surrounding documentation to really highlight all the issues here. And I better stop recording before my drive fills up. Thanks for joining me. Please thumbs up the video and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.